Sorry, I guess Farabut only allows me 10 minutes at a time. So Bnei Yisrael are hearing these rumors that Gad and Reuven have gone and built this massive Mizbeach on the eastern side of the Yarden. Now, what is the significance there? The significance would be, we can't be bothered to go to Shiloh. We live too far away, so we're going to build an alternative Mizbeach. It's feeding into all of these preconceived judgments that Am Yisrael harbored against Reuven and Gad that go all the way back to Moshe and the genesis of the settlements of the land of Israel. Well, we suspected them of doing it 14 years back. Maybe now this is really, they're just making good on their intention, that they're seceding from the Union. They're going all the way over to the east to establish their own nation, and they won't have any need to come back to Shiloh and to consider Shiloh to be the focal point of Avodat Hashem. They're establishing their own focal points of Avodat Hashem. Was this true? No. Tachlis, they actually, as the pasuk tells us, they built their mizbeach on the western bank of the Yarden. In other words, still in Eretz Yisrael, almost as a derech marker, as like a signpost. You want to go worship? Head in that direction. Head west towards Shiloh for all of the Reuvenites and the Gadites. But that's not how the rest of Bnei Yisrael took it. So they understood El Mul Eretz Canaan, El Glilot HaYarden, El Ever Bnei Yisrael. In other words, opposite the bank of where Bnei Yisrael had settled. That they were suspicious that the Mizbeach was built on the opposite bank. Now, they don't necessarily go check this out, but as a kinds of like reconnaissance, they immediately engage in building an army to annihilate Reuven and Gad. This is the first time that we're looking at not the first time we're looking at a fratricide. We've had that before with Yosef, but this is the first time that we are looking at the stirrings of a civil war. This is going to be a theme that we'll see over and over again in Shoftim, and unfortunately, we also see Ad Hayom Hazeh, until this day. Vayishma'u b'nei Yisrael v'yikalu el adat b'nei Yisrael, kol adat b'nei Yisrael. This is the first time that we see mentioned in the Torah of kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Everyone's gathering together. Where are they gathering? To Shiloh, of course, to their center that they're trying to defend, and they're trying to defend the honor of Hashem in Shiloh. La'alot alehem l'tzava. Now, who do they have leading this charge? None other than Pinchas ben Elazar HaKohen. Now, of course, they have Pinchas ben Elazar HaKohen leading the charge. Why? Because Pinchas himself has a deep history as a Kana'i la Hashem, as someone who is very zealous for Hashem. And the Shvatim, the rest of the Shvatim, follow Pinchas to confront Reuven and Gad. And what does Pinchas say to them? In Pasuk Ted Zayin, he says, Kol amru kol adat Yisrael. The entire nation of Israel has said, Yisrael. How could you be so treacherous and betray HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How could you go and secede from Am Yisrael? And beyond that, how can you go against the word of Hashem by building a Mizbeach at a time of Isur Mizbachot and Isur Bamot? And this is a key pasuk in 17 in Yud Zayin. Hama'at lanu et avon peor asher lo hitaharanu mimenu. Don't you remember? Pinchas is saying, I have a long memory, Pinchas says. Don't you remember back in the time of Chet Bal Peor, when there was this fellow from the Nasi of Shevet Shimon, Zimri, who consorted with the princess of Midian, Cozbi, and I, who was a zealot for God, speared them both through and basically caused the terrible plague that was annihilating Am Yisrael to stop. When there is a sin against God, I am the one who acts on God's behalf. And so this is not only a sin against us that you're seceding from the union. This is a sin ma'altem neged Hashem. You are being treacherous to God. This is a sin against God. And how dare you do this? So it is no mistake that Pinchas is the one who is leading this charge. And He goes on and on, lambasting Reuven and Gad for building this Mizbeach. Now, here is where Reuven and Gad pick up where they had left off 14 years back and say, no. This is all a great misunderstanding. We had never intended to secede from the Union. We didn't intend it 14 years ago, and we don't intend it now. We don't intend to establish an alternative place of worship. We intend to always go back to Shiloh. Look at this famous pasuk in Chaf Bet, after Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad answer. El Elohim Adonai, hu yodea, v'Yisrael hu yodea. Im b'mered v'im b'mal b'Adonai al toshi'enu b'yom hazeh. Their plea is extremely passionate, where they call out in the name of God twice over. And they say, God himself will know, and you, Yisrael, must know in our plea to you that we never intended to rebel against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if we did, then he shouldn't save us. Then he should annihilate us. Right away. We never intended, in Pasuk Chav Gimel, Livnot Lanu Mizbeach, Lashuv Me'acharei Hashem. We never intended to build an alternative place of worship so that we would in some way be sinning against God. V'im la'alot alav olah mincha. God forbid we would ever bring a karban on this Mizbeach. V'im la'asot alav zevchei shlamim. Hashem hu yivakesh, right? If we ever had that intention, then God should strike us all dead. Okay, now, why did we build this Mizbeach L'mar'eh? Why did we build this Andarta, this monument? We built this, why? Because we were afraid of the following. Machar yomru b'nechem levanenu lemor, ma lachem v'la Hashem Elokei Yisrael. We're afraid of your kids. We're afraid that your kids are going to look at our kids, at our future generations, and say, look at those outsiders. Look at those who chose not to live in the ancestral territory of Am Yisrael, in the Eretz Avot, in the land that is to the west of the Yarden. We don't have any truck with them. We don't have anything to do with them. So that is why we made sure, Reuven and Gad are saying, that we built this Mizbeach to serve as an Andarta for our children. Never forget, Reuven and Gad, that you have a storied and beautiful history of helping your brothers in war. Reuven and Gad are like the lone soldiers that your family send over to us here in Eretz Yisrael to help fight our wars. That's almost the modern comparison. Don't forget that. And Reuven and Gad go on and with this heartfelt plea that their entire intent was to maintain the integrity of Am Yisrael, and that they had never again intended to separate from Am Yisrael. And so Pinchas is mollified. Pinchas, who is the Kana'i, who is always concerned with the integrity of Am Yisrael, with making sure that Am Yisrael is not sinning against Hashem, and also is not separating one from the other. He makes peace. He builds the covenant once again between the different factions within Am Yisrael, between Reuven and Gad and half of Menashe on the one side, and the rest of the Shvatim on the other side. And this is in Pasuk Lamed. This is all, they were mollified. And Pinchas says to Reuven and Gad and Menashe in Pasuk Lamed Aleph, Hayom yadanu ki bitochenu Hashem, asher lo ma'altem b'Hashem hama'al hazeh, as hitzaltem et b'nei Yisrael miyad Hashem. Now we know, now we understand. Now, I think that this story is so significant in the development of the disparate Shvatim into a nation, because it represents, on the one hand, the commitment of those who never really intended to settle within Eretz Yisrael to the Kedusha Ta'aretz, to the fact that our destiny was to settle in Eretz is to settle in Eretz Yisrael. So Reuven and Gad made sure that their brothers were safely settled in Eretz Yisrael before they went back to the lands that they had claimed for themselves. And it is also a representation on the part of Reuven and Gad, that an understanding that Kedushat Haaretz cannot be replaced in Borough Park or Baltimore or anywhere outside of the Mishkan, and outside of Shiloh or Yerushalayim or within the western side of the Yarden. Even though Reuven and Gad would then go on and settle in their original claim lands that were conquered by Moshe. The message, the takeaway message, and I'm sorry that it's been so belabored, but I did want to go through those psukim with you, of both the parak in Bamidbar and Chavbet in Bamidbar and Chavbet in Lamed Bet in Bamidbar and Chavbet here in Yehoshua, is that it is not enough to feel justified in your own behavior. You also have to make sure that others are not misled or misunderstand what might seem to be a misbehavior of yours. So this is an inyan that we call Yotzei Yedei Habriot, that we make sure that we are well understood and we explain our case to our fellow man when it might seem that that we're doing something wrong. And I bring to you now a Mishnah in Shkalim. This is the third parak of Shkalim, the second Mishnah in Shkalim. I'm just going to read it with you. When in this parak, we're talking about the machatzit hashekel, the contribution, the annual contribution, likrat chodesh adar, of a half a shekel to the lishka, to the otsar, the office of the treasury within the Beit HaMikdash, to make sure that the Beit HaMikdash is well kept and everything, and the karbanot tzibor are paid for by the tzibor. So now we're in this Mishnah that's discussing all of the ways that you could be misunderstood as you enter as the one who is bringing his machatzit hashekel, or the machatzit hashekel on behalf of the community, is coming into the lishka. He has to be sure that he is free from any chashash, from any suspicion. Ein hatorem nichnas lo bepargot chafot. So someone who is coming in to give a truma, to give a donation, shouldn't come in with a skirt or a long garment that's folded over at the bottom, v'lo b'min'al, v'lo b'sandal, and not with some kind of a tight shoe or a sandal, v'lo b'tefillin, v'lo b'kmiya, and not with the tefillin straps, and not with an amulet that has like a little pouch in it. Why? Shema yeyani v'yomru me'avon halishka heyani. Lest he, let's say in the future, within the year, becomes poor, and people will say, oh, it's because he stole from the lishka. He squirreled away some of those donations, and that sin is what made him poor. Oh, Shema yashir v'yomru mitrumat halishka heyashir. Or maybe he suddenly comes into money, and people say, oh, you know why? It's because he took some of the machatzit hashekel that was due to the Beit HaMikdash. He took it for himself. So in other words, you have to make sure that you are cleared from suspicion. Because a person always has to make sure that he's squared away and fine with his fellow man, just like he needs to make sure that he has fulfilled his obligations towards God. What is the proof text of this? The proof text is from Perek Lamed Bet in Bamidbar, where Reuven and Gad say, God forbid, Moshe, you totally misunderstood. We are clean. We are not intending to shirk our responsibility towards Am Yisrael. Let us be innocent from God and from Israel. That's what the pasuk says. The Omer umatzah chen v'seichel tov b'nei Elokim be'adam. And like it says in Mishlei, that one should always find grace in the eyes of God and man. So the fact that these psukim mention both God and man indicate to us that, unlike the way that we normally think, which is, you know what? It's up to him to be done the kaf zchut. It's up to our neighbor to make sure that he judges us favorably. That's not entirely true. It's also up to us. There's a flip side to that. it's up to us to make sure that we aren't misunderstood. So we can't just rely on that and say, well, it's his fault that he didn't understand what I meant, or it's his fault that that it seemed like I was doing something wrong when I know I wasn't doing anything wrong, and God knows I wasn't doing anything wrong. These examples brought in the Psukim from Bamidbar and from Yoshua Chafet teach us that it is the responsibility of he who is suspected of doing something wrong to bend over backwards. These are extremely verbose, as I'm being right now very verbose. These are very verbose prakim, where Ruvain and Gad say over and over and over again, you got it wrong, we didn't intend this, and they mollify Moshe in the first case and Pinchas and Bnei Israel in the second case. There's an extension of this concept in the Mishnah and Shkalim. There's an extension in the Gemara of Yerushalmi, where the Gemara goes into more cases of where you have to make sure that you are free from all suspicion. One who has curls is not allowed to go in to the lishka to bring his machatzit hashekel, because perhaps maybe he is squirreling away some of the half shekel coins in his curls. Lo yitro mipnei hachshad. He should not put himself in a position where he might be misunderstood. And Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, Mishem Rabbi Yonatan, says that there are 3 places in the Torah where we learn this concept that you have to tzarich litzeit yedei habriot kederach shehu tzarich litzeit yedei hamakom. Where do we know in the Torah? Bamidbar Lamed Gimel, where we talk about the Ruvain and Gad seeming to want to be doing something negative, but really intending all along to help Bnei Yisrael in Kibush Haaretz. Where do we see it in Nevi'im? We see it again with Reuven and Gad and Chatzi Shevet Menashe seeming to be doing something extremely negative, of seceding from the union. It was all a matter of perception again. Whereas in reality, they were building an andarta to remind their children where the Kedusha really is. And they then, once they explained themselves, then they were Yotzim Yedei Habriut, then Habriot, then all was forgiven. And the third example is again the pasuk from Mishlei, where you are meant to find chen in the eyes of Hashem and in the eyes of your fellow man. So I just want to end this what I had thought was going to be 5 minutes, and then I guess turned into a half an hour, with a tefillah and a bracha for all of us in these very troubled and difficult times, where it's hard for us to get together and really see what each other intends to convey. Communication is really meant to be panim el panim. Once Pinchas and all of Am Yisrael came to Reuven and Gad were able to make their case. And then Pinchas and Am Yisrael could also see that the Mizbeach really was built on the western bank of the Yarden, not as they had heard, not as they had initially perceived, but actually was truly meant to be an andarta. Then they were mollified. In today's Corona time, it's very hard for us to truly understand each other, empathize with each other, see each other's pain, see where we're coming from. So not only is it incumbent upon us to be dan l'kaf zchut with others if they seem to communicate to us in a way that is distasteful or maybe hurtful, via WhatsApp, via social media, whatever the case may be, in the ways that we have now to communicate with each other, that's not panim el panim, and can't easily erase doubt. But we, on the flip side, as the ones who might be communicating something in a way that is unclear, that could be easily misunderstood, it's incumbent upon us to ease the lines of communication in both directions, to both be dan l'kaf zchut and also to be yotzei yedei habriot, to also make sure that we are as understood as we can be. It's a difficult task. I know we're up for it though, and I look forward at the earliest time that you all can make here and visit us all up here in the Galil. There's a nice group of us, and we'd love to join you and share Torah together here in Artzenu HaKadosha.